Henry came to the orphanage to choose a daughter to adopt. All the girls flocked to him, praying to be chosen. Only I hid in a wardrobe and fell asleep. I thought this would be my chance to escape the fate of becoming the Law family's adopted daughter and eventually Henry's wife in my previous life. I longed to live freely and happily starting over, but when I woke up, I found Henry standing in front of the wardrobe. He smiled and asked Anna, "Would you like to come home with me?" Chapter 1. When Henry's face appeared before me, I thought I was still trapped in the nightmare I had just had. It wasn't until the headmistress, frowning, called out to me, "Anna, why are you hiding in here? Asleep?" that I finally came to my senses and realized everything in front of me was not a dream. Seeing me frozen in place, the headmistress reached out and pulled me out of the wardrobe. She straightened my collar and pushed me toward the Law couple. "You fell asleep, and young Master Law even asked us not to wake you. Everyone's been waiting for you for a while." Henry, the one being mentioned, stood calmly beside the Law couple, a faint smile on his face as he looked at me. At this moment, he seemed slightly different from the Henry the First remembered from my previous life, the one who was always cold and distant toward me. He greeted me proactively. "Hello, Anna," for some reason. Hearing the word Anna come from his lips felt oddly unsettling. I furrowed my brow and avoided meeting his gaze. Inside, I couldn't help but wonder of all the girls they could have chosen. Why did they insist on waiting for me? Why me? What are they planning? The headmistress bent down and explained to me, "They want to adopt you. Anna, you'll have a home now with parents and even a big brother." For once, the usually stern headmistress smiled at me. I could tell she was genuinely happy for me. In the orphanage, any child who got adopted was considered lucky, but the headmistress didn't know I had been reborn. I already knew that Henry would come to the orphanage today to pick a girl, which was why I had deliberately hidden in the wardrobe. "Anna, would you like to come home with us?" Mrs. Law gently held my hand and said warmly, "Henry has always wanted a little sister. You can be his sister from now on." This scene was identical to what had happened in my previous life. Memories of the past flashed through my mind like a slideshow. I immediately pulled my hand back and looked up at the headmistress. I don't want to be adopted by them. The moment I said this, everyone was stunned. The most shocked was Henry. He frowned and asked why. "Because I don't want to be your sister." Even though I rejected him, Henry's face showed no trace of anger. His tone grew even gentler, tinged with an almost imperceptible affection. "Then don't be my sister. Just come live with me at the Law family's house. How about that?" The headmistress tugged at my sleeve discreetly, trying to stop me, but it didn't prevent me from refusing Henry once more. No, I thought Henry would finally give up, but when the headmistress asked the Law couple if they wanted to choose another girl, Henry suddenly spoke up loudly. "Mom, I only want her," he added. "She's the only one who looks most like my little sister." Chapter 2. In my previous life, Henry chose me out of all the girls because I bore a slight resemblance to his late sister. At the time, I thought being chosen was a stroke of divine favor. I was brought to the Law family and given the name on a law in their vast estate. I even had my own room, though it wasn't truly mine. I was content. Mrs. Law once said, "Orphans inevitably carry a certain small-mindedness. Their manners and behavior are hardly presentable." So I worked hard to shed my old habits, becoming less and less like myself. Mrs. Law had high expectations for me. I had to practice piano for over 12 hours a day, even when my teachers repeatedly said I had no talent for it. Mrs. Law still sat with me every day during practice, but some things simply can't be forced. "I'm sorry, Mom. I still can't play it well." Whenever I apologized, Mrs. Law would look at me even more affectionately and reassure me. "It's okay, as long as Anna keeps trying. You'll play beautifully one day later." I discovered that playing piano had been her late daughter's favorite hobby. Mrs. Law didn't care about me. She was merely searching for her daughter's shadow in me, but I didn't mind. A fish desperate for water doesn't care if the water is clean. It just needs enough to survive. Water to a fish is what love was to me. As long as it existed, it was enough. I worked even harder at the piano and strived to make Mrs. Law happy. We became more like a real mother and daughter until Henry's engagement party. He had been drugged, and I accidentally walked into his room. When Mr. Law saw me with Henry, he was so enraged he fainted on the spot. Mrs. Law slapped me hard across the face. I should never have brought you into the Law family. Henry remained silent, staring at me with emotions I couldn't understand. But I guessed he must have been regretting it, too, regretting choosing me as his sister. I don't know what happened. I didn't drug my brother. I desperately tried to explain, but no one believed me. From that moment on, Henry resented me countless times after our marriage. When he betrayed me and our vows, he would sneer. You used drugs to force your brother to marry you. Now this is just your karma. Henry hated me. So, after we married, he often humiliated me in public, making me the subject of ridicule. People in his social circle even placed bets on how long our marriage would last. At most a year. Once the baby's born, Henry will kick her out. But the outcome surprised everyone. Henry and I were entangled for 19 years, even after my death. My tombstone still bore the words wife of Henry Law. Anna, tell me, why don't you want to be adopted by the Law family? After Henry and his parents left, the headmistress called me to her office. I stayed silent for a long while before casually coming up with an excuse. I don't want to leave you and everyone here. The headmistress sighed and encouraged me to think it over again. I knew she meant well and hoped for me to have a better life, but I didn't want to repeat my mistakes or have anything to do with Henry again. Yet that night, a fire at the orphanage destroyed all my plans. Chapter 3. Did you start the fire? In the hospital, I glared coldly at Henry as I questioned him. No, Henry quickly explained. The fire department confirmed it was caused by faulty wiring. After speaking, he let out a self-deprecating laugh. Anna, you think too little of me. We had only met 2 or 3 times in this life. Yet Henry treated me with an inexplicable familiarity. I just want to help you if you agree to come home with me. I'll cover all of the headmistress's medical expenses. Last night's fire had left the headmistress severely burned because she had risked her life to save us. I sneered, my voice laced with mockery, taking advantage of someone's plight. Does that make you a good person? Henry didn't defend himself. He only said, Anna, it doesn't matter if you don't want to be my sister. You can just stay at the Law house as a foster child. He spoke with a gentle persuasion, retreating step by step. But I grew more curious. Why are you so insistent on taking me to the Law family? Henry replied, because my mom has been missing my sister a lot lately, and you look very much like her. I want to bring you home to keep her company. I half believed, half doubted his words. Henry's behavior was just too strange. Is that all? I pressed. Henry hesitated for a moment before nodding. That's all. Although I didn't want to have anything to do with Henry. The headmistress was still lying in a hospital bed on the way to the Law family's house. Henry kept trying to make conversation, but I remained silent, perhaps realizing he wasn't well liked. He softened his tone to justify himself. The Law family can provide you with better opportunities no matter what. It's better than staying at the orphanage. Anna, don't blame me. I'm doing this for your own good. I'm doing this for your own good. Henry had said this to me in my previous life. 2. Henry had hated me for most of his life. It wasn't until I was dying that his attitude softened slightly. By then, it was too late. I was terminally ill. My only companion, a stray cat I had adopted. The one time Henry came back to the villa on a whim, he had the cat I'd cared for over 6 months thrown out. Why? I had asked him. He stared down at me and said, it's for your own good. That was when I realized his so-called for your own good was never really about my well-being. Those words were just an excuse to satisfy his own desires and control, or perhaps another way to torment me, because he had always been like this. Whatever I cherished, he would destroy. When we arrived at the Law family's house, Mrs. Law was already standing at the door. Henry had told her in advance that he would bring me back. So she had prepared a room on the 2nd floor. Anna, this will be your room from now on, she said warmly, holding my hand. Do you like it? I lowered my eyes, staring at her hand, holding mine for a moment before pulling away. I was no longer the girl from my previous life, desperate for motherly love. Mrs. Law, this was your biological daughter's room, wasn't it? I can tell you've preserved her belongings carefully. They must mean a lot to you. If I stay here and accidentally damage anything, you'd surely be upset. I noticed there are guest rooms downstairs. I'll stay in one of those instead. Mrs. Law looked at me and seemed about to say something, but she was interrupted by Henry. Mom, if Anna wants to stay downstairs, have someone prepare a room for her. I glanced at Henry, who had spoken up for me. What he didn't know was that my reluctance to stay on the second floor wasn't just about the room. It was because his bedroom was right next door in my previous life. Before Henry's engagement, we had been on good terms. Once, during my teenage years, Mrs. Law had asked me, Anna, what kind of boys do you like? I had glanced at Henry, just back from a run, and jokingly replied, I like boys like my brother. That thoughtless joke later became damning evidence. Whenever I tried to explain myself to Henry, I didn't drug you, he would grip my neck and sneer. You said at 16 that you liked me. You liked me for so many years that you resorted to drugging me to force me to marry you. Now you won't even admit it. Chapter 4. Perhaps being back in the Law family's mansion triggered something in me because that night I dreamed about my previous life. During my final days, the doctor had said it's not good for you to stay alone like this all the time. Call your family or friends to come and keep you company. I don't have any family. As for friends, my closest friend used to be Henry's fiancée, Margarita. She returned to the country in the 5th year of my marriage to Henry. Henry personally picked her up from the airport and even hosted a grand welcome dinner in her honor. Someone deliberately recorded a video of the event and sent it to me, a short clip of the two of them sitting in a corner, passionately kissing. The video was only a few seconds long, but I watched it over and over all night. That night, I made a decision. I would give up on my second child and ask Henry for a divorce. He asked me why. I showed him the video. Henry, I know you were forced to marry me back then, but now Margarita is back, and it seems like she's forgiven you. Let's get a divorce and go our separate ways. This wasn't the first time I had brought up divorce, but Henry had always refused. I thought that with Margarita back, he would finally agree this time, but instead, he tore up the divorce papers I had prepared and deleted the video from my phone. Anna. I suddenly woke up and instinctively slapped Henry across the face. The teenage Henry looked at me, his eyes filled with a hint of grievance. I heard you crying from outside, so I came in to check on you, he said, turning to leave at the door. He paused and added, hurry up and get ready for breakfast. You'll be late for school, just like in my previous life. The Law family had transferred me to Henry's school. As I followed him into the classroom, someone asked Henry, who's she? Henry introduced me. This is Anna. She's currently staying with my family. It struck me how different this was from my previous life. Back then, Henry would always say, this is my sister, Anna Law, watching Henry walk just one step ahead of me. I suddenly realized he seemed different from the Henry the first remembered. He wasn't like the cold teenager of my past, nor was he the vengeful, tormenting man from later years. My heart skipped a beat as a sudden thought struck me. Henry. I called his name, preparing to voice my suspicions, but someone else called him at the same time. Henry glanced at me, then looked past me to the person standing behind me. I turned to see who it was. Standing in the doorway was Margarita. Henry, wait for me after school.
I need to talk to you, she said.
Only then did Margarita notice me standing beside Henry. Her gaze wasn't friendly. She sized me up, her eyes full of challenge. So you're the girl staying with the Laws? Despite being my best friend in my previous life, I immediately felt the hostility in her eyes. This was completely different from before in my previous life. When Margarita learned I was Henry's sister, she had warmly taken my arm, called me Anna, and brought me into her social circle. But now, her attitude toward me was more like how it had been during our last unpleasant encounter in my previous life. During that meeting, I had asked her, the security footage shows only you and me entering Henry's room that night. I didn't drug him. Was it you at the time? I couldn't understand why she would sabotage her own engagement to Henry if she loved him so much. Her name is Anna. Henry answered for me. Margarita glanced at me, gave a perfunctory smile, and said nothing more. Later, as I sat at my desk, I noticed Margarita frequently turning to look back at me, though I found it odd. I forced myself to ignore her and focus on class. Chapter 5. In my previous life, I wasn't a good student. But Mrs. Law didn't care about my poor grades. If anything, the worse I performed, the happier she seemed. She would always say Anna is becoming more and more like her. She wasn't a studious girl either. Parents who truly love their children think about their long-term future. They wouldn't be content with raising a beautiful failure. The truth was, she had never seen me as her real daughter. To her, I was nothing more than a temporary substitute for her deceased child. I had spent the first half of my life being a stand-in for someone else's daughter, and the latter half as a gilded cage bird, wasting away. This time, I refused to follow the same path. Studying was my only way out, but learning wasn't easy. Frustrated by my inability to understand the material, I stood up from my seat. Henry, who had been talking to someone, noticed my movement and turned to ask, "Where are you going?" "To the restroom," I replied impatiently. In my memory, the girls' restroom during school breaks was always crowded, but today it was unexpectedly empty. As soon as I pushed the door open, I realized something was off. Several girls turned simultaneously to look at me. Margarita was the closest to me. She tossed a cigarette to the floor, glanced at the girl they had pinned to the ground and soaked in dirty water, then walked toward me. "We were just playing around," she said with a smile. "You won't tell Henry, will you?" Looking at the cigarette butt on the ground, I suddenly realized how little I had truly known Margarita. How could I not have known that she smoked in school and bullied her classmates? After a moment, I replied, "I'm not that close to Henry." "Really?" Margarita asked, her expression softening noticeably. "But you're staying with his family, aren't you?" I met her gaze. "I'm just staying there temporarily. We're not close." Margarita nodded. "That's good." With that, she quickly left with her friends. Once they were gone, I glanced at the girl on the ground but quickly looked away and entered a stall. When I came out, the girl was standing by the mop sink with her back to me. She was wearing just a tank top while rinsing her shirt under the faucet. Hearing the door open, she hurriedly wrung out her shirt and slipped it on, then kept her head down as she tried to leave. As she passed me, I reached out and grabbed her arm. She looked at me in confusion, and I met her gaze. After a long silence, I finally remembered her name, Celine. I took off my jacket and handed it to her. "Your shirt is wet. Wear mine." Celine lowered her head again and refused. "I'm fine. Your wet shirt is see-through. People will see your tank top." At my words, Celine's ears turned bright red. She awkwardly raised her arms to cover her chest, hesitating for a moment before finally accepting my jacket. Watching her enter the stall to change, I quietly let out a breath of relief. I wasn't usually the type to meddle in others' affairs, but in my previous life, Celine had jumped to her death shortly after I transferred to the school. The official explanation was a combination of family issues and academic pressure.
But now,
it seemed her reasons for suicide might not have been so simple. A life cut short too soon.
"Thank you."
Celine's voice brought me back to reality as she came out wearing my jacket. I was about to say "you're welcome," but swallowed the words. Instead, I asked, "You must be a good student, right?" I remembered Celine had been the top student in her grade before her death.
She paused, then nodded.
"I guess so, Celine," I said, glancing at my jacket on her. "I lent you my jacket. How about you tutor me in return?" Before she could refuse, I added, "We'll be changing seats after the quiz. Let's sit together so it's easier for you to help me." Celine hesitated for a long time before finally agreeing. After school, Henry insisted I ride home with him. As soon as I got in the car, Margarita called out to him, "Henry, can we talk?" I wasn't interested in their conversation and didn't want to eavesdrop. But the area was quiet, and Margarita was emotional, her voice carrying clearly. "Henry, are you breaking up with me because of Anna?" "Henry, we've been together for so long." Anna shows up, and you immediately break up with me. Who else could it be about? Henry sounded a little exasperated. It has nothing to do with anyone. Margarita, I just realized I don't feel that way about you. I've always thought of you as a sister.
Suddenly,
Everything clicked. That explained why Margarita had been so focused on me today, even turning around to glance at me repeatedly during class. Chapter 6 During dinner, Mrs. Law suddenly said, Anna, I found a piano teacher for you today, starting tomorrow, before she could finish. Henry interrupted her. Mom, Anna doesn't like piano. Please don't impose your own hobbies on her. Mrs. Law smiled awkwardly, but didn't say anything more. I looked up at Henry, my suspicions growing stronger in this life. I had never told Henry that I didn't like playing the piano. The only person who knew this was Henry from my previous life. I remembered when my illness had worsened after he threw away my cat. Despite our mutual resentment, Henry had unexpectedly moved back into the villa to take care of me. It happened to coincide with our 19th wedding anniversary. Henry gave me a Steinway piano that had been air-shipped from abroad, even though I said, I don't like the piano. I only learned it because Mom liked it. He still gave me a set of jewelry later that night as a replacement. He had suddenly become a different person, meticulous and patient. How do you know Anna doesn't like piano? Mrs. Law, unwilling to give up, turned to me. Anna, would you like to learn piano? I quickly gathered my thoughts and smiled as I declined. Mrs. Law, I need to focus on my studies. I really don't have time to learn piano. After dinner, I was heading to my room to rest when Henry stopped me. Anna, after tomorrow's quiz, we'll get to pick our seats based on our rankings. Where do you want to sit? Seeing my lack of response, Henry continued. How about the fifth seat by the window? That had been my seat throughout my school years in my previous life. Henry's gaze was intense, as if he was eager for my affirmation. I glanced at him deeply before casually replying, whatever. My indifferent response seemed to inexplicably excite him until the next day. He watched in shock as I walked past him and sat down next to Celine. Anna, Henry called out to me in front of everyone. He forced a smile and asked, Did you go to the wrong seat?
no.
Henry stood awkwardly in place. After a long pause, he quietly sat down. You were the first to pick a seat. Why did you choose this one? I asked Celine, unable to hold back. Celine had chosen a terrible spot front and center in the first row. I'm nearsighted. I can't see the blackboard from far away, she explained. She didn't usually wear glasses. Seeing my skepticism, Celine added bluntly, I don't have extra money, so I never got a pair.
Oh,
I mumbled, I thought you were trying to keep others away by picking such a terrible spot for me. Celine looked up from her quiz paper and said matter-of-factly, You're overthinking it. Whether I was overthinking or not didn't matter. By lunchtime, I was dragging Celine to the optician's shop outside the school and insisting she get glasses. I justified it by saying, if you can't see the blackboard, your grades will drop.
who's going to tutor me then?
Think of these glasses as payment for your tutoring. I added, after all, it was Henry's money I was spending. He owed me so much. Why not use a little? Originally, I only intended to get her glasses, but I ended up making her cry. Even when Margarita and her friends bullied her, Celine hadn't shed a tear. Yet as I handed her the glasses, she broke down completely through sobs. She choked out, Anna, I'll definitely pay you back when I have the money. It took me a while to calm her down on our way back to the classroom. Henry stopped me at the staircase. He demanded, Why didn't you choose the seat we agreed on? Who said we agreed on anything? I snapped. Henry, did I promise you anything? Henry was at a loss for words. He stared at me for a long time before asking, Anna, why is everything different now? Are you also? He trailed off. I smiled at him. Also what? But Henry didn't answer. However, news of him confronting me in the stairwell quickly reached Margarita. After class, she came to me and warned, Stay away from Henry. Celine, out of concern, also advised me, Anna, you should keep your distance from Henry. Don't get involved with him, to convince me. She even brought up her own experience of being bullied by Margarita. Henry only asked me a single question once, and Margarita accused me of trying to seduce him.
Anna.
Margarita isn't someone you want to mess with. I'm afraid she'll target you. I was already eager to stay away from Henry, but he clung to me like a shadow. He always managed to show up unexpectedly. I sighed quietly, put down my homework, and pulled the worried Celine into a reassuring hug. Don't worry. Unfortunately, her concerns were soon validated. Chapter 7. Can we talk? Margarita cornered me in the hallway. I wanted to refuse. But when I saw the undisguised hatred in her eyes, I changed my mind. Sure, her attitude in this life was so drastically different from the past that I sometimes wondered if she, like Henry and me, had also been reborn. What do you want to talk about? I asked, stepping closer to her. Margarita didn't respond immediately. She only spoke when the voices from the nearby stairwell grew louder. Nothing much, she said dismissively, her tone laced with disdain. If you weren't staying with the laws, you wouldn't even be worthy of speaking to me. The moment she finished, she suddenly fell backward. Henry, coming up the stairs, happened to witness her fall. Anna, why did you push me? Margarita sobbed, accusing me. Her words immediately drew the blame-filled stares of the surrounding students. Henry frowned, but said nothing. He glanced up at me, standing on the landing, then instructed a few boys to take Margarita to the hospital. As she left, Margarita clung to Henry, crying, Henry, my leg hurts so much. What if I can never dance again? Henry consoled her briefly, watching as she was carried away. Once the crowd dispersed, he approached me with a stern look. He said, apologize to Margarita. Why should I? She fell on her own. Henry sighed deeply. Margarita is a dancer. Are you saying she would risk her legs and her future just to frame you? Anna, I know you hate Margarita, but that's because… He stopped mid-sentence, seemingly realizing he'd said too much. I scoffed, deliberately pushing him. Because what? Henry, I just transferred here. I've had no prior conflicts with Margarita. Why don't you tell me why I would hate her? Henry stared at me silently. The more he tried to hide the truth about his rebirth, the more I wanted to expose him. It's because you know I've been reborn, just like you, isn't it? You know how many things Margarita did to hurt me in our past lives? You assume I hate her, that I pushed her out of revenge, right? I thought I'd cornered him into admitting it, but after a long silence, Henry simply denied it. I don't know what you're talking about, but if you did something wrong, you should apologize. Let's go apologize to Margarita, okay? I laughed in disbelief. Henry, you're still the same, even after living another life. You're still a coward who lies to himself, unwilling to face his past mistakes. He wouldn't even admit to his rebirth. My words made Henry's pupils tremble, but he quickly looked away, avoiding my gaze. I need to check on Margarita. With that, he turned and walked away. I didn't know if he was genuinely concerned for her or just trying to escape me, but I wasn't going to let him off so easily. I quickly caught up to him. If you think I pushed her, then I should go see her too, and maybe help her remember who actually pushed her. Chapter 8. When Henry and I arrived at the hospital, Margarita's leg was already in a cast. She was lying on the hospital bed, and the moment she saw Henry, she started crying.
Henry.
The doctor said my leg is badly injured. I'm so scared. When she noticed me walking in behind him, she immediately turned her anger on me. Anna, why did you push me? You know I'm a dancer, and my legs can't afford to be injured. I listened silently as she vented her accusations before smiling and asking, Margarita, are you sure it was me who pushed you down the stairs? There were only the two of us there. If it wasn't you, who else could it have been? Her emotions flared as she put on an impressive act. I've been dancing since I was a child. You know how much I treasure my legs. You've ruined me. My parents won't let this go, and the school will definitely expel you. Anna. Henry tried to calm her down, gently patting her back before turning to me with another demand. Anna, apologize. I ignored him instead. I continued to address Margarita. Are you assuming there's no surveillance in the stairwell and that you can frame me with impunity? Margarita, I'd suggest you check again. Look carefully for any cameras you might have missed. For a brief moment, Margarita's expression froze. I caught the flicker of unease in her eyes. Margarita hadn't been reborn. If she had, she would have known that the surveillance cameras on the adjacent school building captured the area around the stairwell. Disappointed, I turned to leave. Henry had intended to walk out with me, but Margarita stopped him. Henry, my leg hurts so much. Can you stay with me? Henry glanced at her, then called after me. Anna, wait for me outside, like I would wait for him. I left the hospital without looking back. Anna, as I returned to school, I heard Celine calling out behind me, panting. She handed me a flash drive. What's this? I asked. Still catching her breath, Celine replied. I heard about what happened with you and Margarita. There's no surveillance in the stairwell to clear your name, so I searched for hours until I found the footage from the adjacent school building. It captured what happened. Margarita's dad is one of the school's board members. I was worried they'd delete the footage, so I sneaked into the surveillance room and copied it. A warm wave of gratitude filled my heart. I linked my arm through Celine's. Playfully leaning against her, Celine, you're so good to me. Celine adjusted her glasses, clearly flustered, even as she tried to suppress her reaction. I noticed the tips of her ears turning red, trying to sound aloof. She muttered, hurry back to class. Midterms are coming up. You need to focus on studying. As it turned out, the footage Celine had worked so hard to copy wasn't even necessary that evening. Margarita was caught in the school hallway, sneaking around to find surveillance footage. Unfortunately for her, she ran into Henry and me. Before I could say anything, Henry stepped forward and asked, what are you doing here alone so late at night? Margarita stammered, unable to come up with a convincing excuse. Feeling sorry for her awkwardness, I decided to help her out. She's obviously worried, so she came back to check the surveillance footage. I said kindly. I even pointed toward the adjacent school building. The cameras you're looking for are over there. They'll have captured everything, but it might be too late to delete anything now because I've already made a copy. I looked at Margarita and asked again. Margarita, let me ask you one more time. Did I push you? Margarita bit her lip and turned to Henry, only to see him staring at her cast-covered leg. You're in a cast, yet you managed to come here all by yourself. Margarita's panic was palpable. Her explanations jumbled. Finally, she broke down and admitted the truth. Henry, I'm sorry. I was so scared at the time that I thought Anna pushed me. But actually, I tripped and fell on my own. Henry's expression turned icy as he shook her off and walked away without another word. The next day, under my not-so-subtle encouragement, Margarita publicly confessed to the entire class that she had fallen on her own. Chapter 9. In the second semester of our sophomore year, Celine and I applied to live in the school dormitory. Celine did so because her aunt, who had been her guardian, was moving out of town and didn't want her living alone. I did so because I'd had enough of Henry's insincere attentiveness. This time, the law couple didn't protest much. They asked a few perfunctory questions before agreeing. Only Henry strongly opposed it. Why do you insist on living at school? He asked while packing my things. I brushed him off impatiently. It's more convenient, and I can focus better on my studies. Henry said nothing more, and silence hung in the air for a while, just as I thought he had left. I heard his voice again. You're doing this to get away from me, aren't you? Anna, I really thought we could start over, but you refused to forgive me. You're still holding a grudge. I turned to look at him and asked with feigned innocence. Why would I hold a grudge against you? Henry, you're so strange. First, you said I hated Margarita, and now you think I hate you. Henry stared at me for a long moment. He slowly closed his eyes, opened them again, and forced a faint smile. You do hate me. After all, Anna, can't you just forget everything from our past lives? Can't we start over? I smirked at him, dropping the act. Are we? But Henry, as if blind to my blatant disgust, continued speaking as if in a dream. Anna, since fate has given us another chance, can't we just forget the past and start fresh? Henry truly was rotten to the core, suppressing the anger bubbling inside me. I glared at him. Henry, the one who was hurt last time wasn't you. The one who lost everything wasn't you. Of course, it's easy for you to say we should forget the pain and start over. But why should I forget? And why should I start over with you? The ones who cause harm can casually say I'm sorry and expect those 3 simple words to erase everything. To gain forgiveness. How convenient for them.
Henry.
Undeterred.
Pressed on.
Anna, I'll give you everything you lost in your previous life. Will that be enough? Before my engagement last time, you once said you felt like the happiest little girl in the world if you let go of the past. We can make that happen again. You can be friends with Margarita. We won't be siblings, and our parents won't object to us being together. After college, we can get married, and they'll treat you as their own daughter. We can live a happy life together. Anna, you can still be that happiest little girl. Let's start over, okay? I coldly refused. No, I'll never be friends with Margarita in this life, and I'll never marry you, Henry. When will you stop lying to yourself? I'm not lying to myself, Henry insisted stubbornly. Anna, nothing is impossible. His eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. Henry was a delusional and irrational man. Not long after, I discovered just how far he would go. Margarita moved into the dormitory as well, and was assigned to share a room with Celine and me. She repeatedly tried to win us over, but Celine and I ignored her. Until the day before our final exams, Celine and I were studying in our dorm when Margarita barged in, shouting and crying. Why do you hate me so much? I've apologized to you, and I've been trying to make amends. What more do you want? Today is my birthday, but instead of celebrating, I'm stuck in this lousy dorm being treated like dirt by you two. I begged my mom to let me go home, but Henry wouldn't allow it. He forced me to stay here and be friends with you. I don't want to be friends with you. I hate you both. Ever since I was little, my mom told me to please Henry, to make him like me so I could marry him someday. I've worked so hard to do everything right. But why did you ruin it all, Anna? Why did you show up and make all my efforts worthless? Celine and I exchanged a glance, watching Margarita collapse to the floor in tears. Celine grabbed my arm and led me out of the room. She asked, "Do you think I've been too cold toward Margarita?" I shook my head and told her, "She bullied you. You have every right to treat her however you want. No one can demand that you forgive someone who's hurt you." To me, Celine was already more than kind. At least. As we left the dorm, she tossed a pack of tissues to Margarita. After that day, Margarita's behavior grew even stranger. She began clinging to me and Celine in increasingly desperate ways. She even requested a seating change to sit directly behind me in class. Margarita tried to create the illusion that we were close friends. "I've decided," she announced one day, "I'm going to work hard and study with you too. Maybe we can even get into the same college." She frequently asked for help with her homework. "Anna, won't you teach me this problem?" The tone of her voice was eerily familiar, pulling me back to memories of our past life. Back then, when Margarita and I had been best friends, she used the same tone whenever she wanted something from me. Celine once asked me privately, "Do you think Margarita has really changed?" "Maybe," I replied, watching Margarita walk toward us from a distance, but I added softly, "I still believe no one changes overnight. People don't suddenly turn bad, nor do they suddenly turn good." Chapter 10. Life continued like this until the college entrance exams were over. Just as Henry had promised, he really tried to make up for what he owed me in the past. Piece by piece, he returned the things I had lost in my previous life. My relationship with Margarita had eased slightly. Thanks to her one-sided efforts, the law couple also treated me better and better after the exams. They even brought me back to their house and announced they would throw me an 18th birthday party. When Margarita found out about this, she volunteered to help. "I want to help with Anna's birthday party," she said. Henry smiled and agreed. "Of course, you're Anna's best friend. She'll definitely be happy with your help." Then, with a meaningful glance at me, Henry added, "Anna, it's amazing how well you and Margarita get along now." See, nothing is impossible. I knew what he was implying but chose to simply smile without correcting him. On the day of my birthday, Henry gave me a watch worth over $3 million. I didn't refuse and accepted it with a smile. After all, my foster arrangement with the Law family would end when I turned 18. Once I left, there would be countless expenses to cover. If he was willing to give, I had no reason not to accept. The Law's influence in the city was significant. Even for my birthday party, many prominent figures attended. Margarita invited several of our classmates, while I only invited Celine. The extravagant nature of the party made both Celine and me feel out of place. We slipped away to the backyard together. "What are your plans for the summer?" I asked. Celine sipped her juice and replied softly, "I plan to get a summer job. I need to earn enough to cover my expenses for freshman year." I fiddled with the watch on my wrist, telling her I wanted to join her. Before I could finish my sentence, a scream erupted from inside the mansion. When Celine and I rushed to the second floor, we found Henry and Margarita already dressed. But the disheveled bed and the suggestive marks on their bodies made it clear what had transpired. "Mr. Love slapped Henry across the face in front of everyone. "How could you do something like this? Don't you have any shame?" Margarita stepped forward, shielding Henry as she cried and pleaded for him. "Uncle, please don't blame Henry." The house descended into chaos. Henry noticed me standing in the crowd. He tried to come over to explain, but Margarita's parents blocked his path. "Henry, you're not going anywhere. You need to give us an explanation." The party ended abruptly, with guests leaving early by around p.m. Margarita's family finally left the Law residence, judging by their cordial expressions and polite conversation. It seemed the two families had reached an agreement on how to handle the situation. On my way back to my room, I overheard Mr. Law in the study telling Mrs.
Law.
"Let's arrange their engagement in a few days. Start preparing for the engagement party." Late that night, Henry knocked on my door. I pretended not to hear the next morning. Just as I was heading out to join Celine for a summer job, Henry stopped me. He tried to explain.
"I don't know what happened last night."
"I was drugged." "Oh," I replied with a mocking smile. "Drugged by someone else or by yourself?" Henry's eyes filled with pain. "Why would I drug myself?"
"Why not?"
My tone was sharp. "Henry, wasn't that exactly what you did in our past life? You drugged yourself, ruined my reputation, and then made me take the blame. In my previous life, I had always believed Margarita was the one who drugged Henry. It wasn't until I was on my deathbed that Henry confessed. He had said, 'Anna, what else could I do? I liked you. I actually liked my own sister. I thought that if I did this, our parents would agree to let me marry you. But I never expected my father to die of a heart attack because of it. Anna, if it weren't for loving you, I wouldn't have caused my father's death or lived my life in guilt, unable to even face my own mother. Anna, you're at fault too. So you're meant to stay in this hell with me.' He had clung to me then, sobbing. 'Anna, don't leave me. I was wrong. I really was. I shouldn't have hurt you.' Henry had deceived others and himself in that life. He even shifted the blame for dragging himself onto me, as if absolving himself would make him feel better. He had always been a coward, whether in the past life or this one. 'I'm sorry,' Henry said hoarsely, pleading for my forgiveness. 'I wronged you in our past life, Anna. I truly regret it. Please forgive me. But I swear, this time it wasn't me who did it. Please believe me.' He reached out to grab me, but I recoiled as if avoiding filth. As I turned to leave, I heard him call out behind me, 'Anna, I'll break off the engagement with Margarita. Wait for me.' I walked away without looking back. Chapter 11. As the start of university approached, Celine came to the Law residence to help me move my belongings. The Law couple had reverted to their usual cold indifference. When I mentioned I was leaving, they simply responded with polite but detached remarks. Everything was going smoothly until Henry came home early. He stood in my way. 'Did my parents agree to you moving out?' When I nodded, he seemed unwilling to accept it. 'That's impossible. Mom and Dad said they liked you and have always treated you like their own daughter. Wait here. I'll go ask them.' The moment he stepped into the house, Celine and I carried our things out and left. As we exited the neighborhood, we ran into Margarita. She didn't greet us like she used to, Nor did she try to curry favor with me or Celine anymore at first. It seemed like she wanted nothing to do with us, but for some reason, she suddenly turned back and called out to me. Anna, did you really think I wanted to be friends with you? Honestly, if it weren't for Henry's insistence, I wouldn't even spare you a glance. Perhaps emboldened by her engagement to Henry, Margarita leaned close and revealed a secret. Your birthday party? I was the one who dreaded Henry that day. I glanced at Margarita, feeling an overwhelming sense of how perfectly matched she and Henry were. Even their repulsive schemes aligned so well. I'll be marrying him soon, becoming part of the Law family. Anna, I don't even like Henry that much, but my parents are determined to form an alliance with his family. She bragged about how many benefits would come with marrying Henry. I remained indifferent. No one knew better than I how miserable a marriage to Henry would be. After parting ways with Margarita, Celine suddenly remarked, Anna, you were right. No one suddenly becomes evil, and no one suddenly becomes good. She sighed. Thank goodness neither of us fell for it. Chapter 12. For years later, after finishing our undergraduate degrees, Celine and I chose not to pursue further studies. Instead, we started a business together. On my 18th birthday, Henry had gifted me an expensive watch. I sold it, using the proceeds as our startup capital, with a combination of good luck and fragments of memories from my past life. Our company thrived under our management. The next time I saw Henry was at a bidding event. Over the years, I had occasionally heard gossip about him and Margarita. They divorced not long after getting married. At first, Margarita refused to agree to the divorce, but Henry had his ways. She suffered so much under his methods that she eventually had no choice but to relent. After the bidding ended, Henry caught up with me in the parking lot. He stood there, awkward and hesitant, before finally saying, I'm sorry, Anna. I glanced at him briefly. If you're really sorry, then withdraw from the bidding. Henry paused, then surprisingly agreed. All right, even so, I didn't take it seriously. Henry was an incredibly selfish person. His apologies were always empty words. When it came to matters involving his own interests, no one was more calculating than him. Later, I called Celine and gave her a quick update on the bidding. Celine sighed. The Law family is in this too. Does that mean we don't stand a chance? Not necessarily, I replied. If the Law family has stooped to competing with a newly established company like ours, it only proves that they're on the brink of collapse. Mark my words. We've got this in the bag. Hearing my confidence, she let out a sigh of relief. If you say so, then I'll stop worrying. Celine always trusted me. She believed in me no matter what.